Hi, and welcome back to Unmasking the Trans Movement with John Mueller. I'm your host, Brad Wilder. Today, part 2 with Lisa Logan. She brought a lot to part 1. John Mueller and Lisa are standing by for part 2. Let's bring them into the show right now. And I know we left off at an interesting place, and one of the things that I'm most curious about is holding some accountability to these individuals. So let's jump into the conversation with John and Lisa, and let's see where this takes us for another 30 minutes.
There you go. Lisa, thank you for being back. Tell people where they can find you, so to speak, on social media as well as your YouTube channel.
I'm glad to be back. You can find me on Twitter at I am Lisa Logan. You can find me on YouTube at Parents of Patriots, and I also have a Substack called Education Manifesto.
Yeah, and I want, as a matter of fact, here is your YouTube channel. We showed this last time, so we highly recommend people go and access your YouTube channel, Parents of Patriots, Patriots.com. And there's just so much information. The top left video there, right there, you have a lot on this site, but that's where, and you described how you have the opportunity to address the United Nations. So you bring with you a lot of definitive information, Lisa, that parents need to understand. The message is that schools are no longer about teaching math, reading, writing, and arithmetic. There's a whole nother side of what's going on in the schools, and parents are being awakened too late to the idea that our kids are coming home and they have a lot of additional ideas, such as non-binary, and they're speaking almost a foreign language. That would be bad enough, but they're capturing the hearts and minds of our kids, and this is moving in a direction. So, Lisa, we left off last time. You gave a lot of information how kids are, as it were, primed to be able to be moldable, malleable, to kind of head them in a certain direction, to leave them very open to scripting, as well as eventually being pulled away from the parents, the undermining of parental rights. Speak to us a little bit more about that, if whatever comes to mind, and then show us the big picture, like who's behind this at a very large level, so that if I, as a parent, don't get involved, somebody is taking my child somewhere.
Oh, definitely, and that's the scary part, right? We're literally taking the right and moral obligation as a parent. I have 3 kids of my own to love your child, to raise your child. It should be anyone's prerogative, no matter what side of the political spectrum you sit on, to be able to raise your child with the beliefs that is a part of your family structure. And so this is, in all ways, shapes, and forms, a state-sanctioned religion. Because we left off at the end talking about how they use this sense of belonging in the classroom and the environment to manipulate students to think that that's their kind of new family, and then to undermine parents to say, oh, their ideas they're outdated, and they just, and maybe they're even bigoted, right? Maybe your religion's bigoted, and you need to step away from that and kind of create this new religion in the classroom where anything goes, right? Anything goes. If you want to, and that's not what religion is, right? When you were raised in a family, a lot of people have a doctrine, right? Whatever that is. It could be the Bible, it could be the Quran, it could be whatever it is, but you have a scripture that you kind of rely on as your basis of moral ideas and beliefs. And so most religions a lot of religions use the Bible as, the evangelicals, the Southern Baptists, all these people, but now they're saying, well, we're only going to take certain parts of the Bible, and those can be true, right? The rest of it, we're going to just be inclusive of everybody, even if the Bible says that there are only 2 sexes. And in fact, if you believe that, it's dogmatic and life-denying. And Fetzer, who is one of the big people behind this, believes that. And that's actually where one of the main players behind social emotional learning was born. And that's the Collaborative for Academic social emotional learning, or CASEL, CASEL. And in 1994, at the Fetzer Institute, that was where social emotional learning was born, and they came up with not only the definition of social emotional learning, but the 5 core competencies they were going to teach at school. And those kind of went along, and they seemed kind of, again, very self-management, self-awareness, social awareness, responsible decision-making, things like that. And, I told you those kind of got integrated with Common Core. And then, interestingly enough, the same people behind social emotional learning are the same people behind Common Core, the Aspen Institute, people like Linda Darling Hammond. A lot of people don't know this, but Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as UNESCO, who we talked about also the last time I was on the show, were also behind the implementation of Common Core, as well as NCEE and Mark Tucker, who wrote a letter to Hillary Clinton after her husband became president to say we should restructure the whole education system to be a school to workforce pipeline. And so these same actors are kind of working together still to restructure our whole education system around social emotional skills, the teaching, measuring, and tracking of those, and to basically social engineer society. And the way they're doing that is through assessments. So not only are we teaching kids about social emotional learning at school, but we're also assessing the heck out of them. So they take these, sometimes they're surveys, sometimes people call them screeners. On my YouTube channel, I have a whole video in my Sinister S.E.L. series dedicated to assessments. You'll see a chart on there, and they're actually giving kids a score. And we had to move, because in order to measure things, they have to be quantitative, not qualitative. And so someone has, through Panorama Education, which is one of the ways that they assess a lot of these skills. Panorama Education is actually owned by the son-in-law of our Attorney General Merrick Garland, the same one that came out and told parents they were domestic terrorists for asking questions at school board meetings. Panorama is actually owned by his son-in-law, Zan Tanner. And so Panorama is being adopted all over the nation, and kids will go in and take these surveys. They're often very leading surveys, and what they do then is based on these surveys that they run through this way to assess it, and then they give them a score. You're this much in social awareness, you're this much in self-management, and then they can assign them to curated groups to, again, we were talking about last time, that feedback loop, to get them to increase their skill in that positive, in that particular area. And so that's scary, right? Because then you could ask yourself, well, what are they doing with that information? Why are they assessing these skills? And then that follows them in what they call their data backpack. And that goes into the statewide longitudinal data system. That's where everything's housed, right? And there's basically like a learner profile on your kid. They're doing
So
this.
Parents need to understand your kid's being tracked. Something's being developed behind the scenes, a profile of your child that's going to follow your child into adulthood.
Right, and it's personalized to their track, right? So they specifically know about your child. How are they doing in academics? And when we're talking about academics, that doesn't sound like such a bad thing, right? Providing a feedback loop to students so that they can increase their skill level so they can be college and career ready. But when we're talking about social emotional skills, and those can be very subjective, right? Your definition of empathy, John, might be completely different than mine. Your definition of what it looks like to have responsible decision-making could be completely different than mine. And so the way that these actors like CASEL and Fetzer and these people behind them are translating it has a lot to do with their skill level, right? And so that's the problem. And then they say, well, you're not responsible. You're not doing responsible decision-making enough. Well, if to them, responsible decision-making means you're an activist and you're out in the community, holding signs saying, Black Lives Matter, then we have a problem. And especially because the standard bearers, CASEL, back in 2020, actually changed their whole definition of social emotional learning and the 5 core competencies to reflect this thing called transformative S.E.L. And when I first started looking at Second Step, that was what clued me in, actually. On their website, they say they subscribe to CASEL's new definition of transformative S.E.L., and I was like, well, what's that? And I started looking into that, and it was all about teaching kids to be anti-racist, which is, people who recognize the system as completely racist, and then they need to overthrow it. It's not being not racist, which we'd all agree is a good thing, and stuff like that. So they create the standards, and all the S.E.L. programs out there base their programs on CASEL standards, because most states won't even adopt programs that aren't CASEL approved. So, and even if they don't have a program, they are using CASEL 5, so the CASEL 5 standards themselves, the 5 core competencies. So those are some of the people behind it, right? And then to think, okay, well, what are they going to use those scores for? And that follows the child into grade to grade, school to school, and across their whole academic career, preschool through age 20. So knowing that there's a school to workforce pipeline, and right now, what do we seeing happen in the workforce right now? We have ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores. And this is why you're seeing businesses put a black square, a rainbow flag in their profile picture, because they are held to these standards that actually are aligned also to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So businesses and investors won't do business with these companies if they don't hold to these standards. And so they're going to be costed out of business if they don't follow the narrative that they want them to follow. And the S in there again stands for social, which is why that alignment to what is that progressive ideology going on in society is so important. And so
matter of fact, Lisa, just to help a parent, bring them along. Mm-hmm. So you need a workforce. You need to make sure that people on the job aren't going to give pushback if something is introduced. So this is a form of brainwashing from cradle to the grave. So as these kids are coming through school, they're supposed to be learning reading, writing, and arithmetic. But meanwhile, their worldview, little by little, is being shifted so that by the time they enter the workforce, when it has to do with things such as ethics and morals, everything has been inverted. So empathy and compassion, empathy is no longer about, can I feel for someone, but I start to feel badly if I have discernment and I have questions about somebody's motives. I'm a woman or a girl, and a man walks into the woman's room. The normal, healthy girl or woman should be concerned, because I can tell you that man is steeped in pornography. That man is deviant. So if a woman cannot say, you shouldn't be in here, I don't feel safe, what's happened little by little is everything's been flipped to where now the child or the woman is the bigot. Right. And therefore, this is the perfect predator protection plan in a lot of different ways. And so it's scripting kids' minds to where once they get into the workplace, they're just going to do what they're told and not have any independent thoughts.
Right. And actually, another S.E.L. researcher, Jennifer McWilliams, she was actually a teacher at a school where they were using the Leader in Me program. And they used one of the principles of that, seek first to understand before you're understood, to then propagate that same thing you were just talking about, John, where, if a girl goes into a restroom and she sees a boy there, she has to seek first to understand before she's understood. I mean, they're using these principles to manipulate people's sense of right and wrong, and to basically say you have to accept everything in order to be inclusive.
You can't question anything.
No. And so, going back to these scores, right? And so say your child doesn't buy into the fact that there's more than 2 genders, right? Or more than 2 sexes. What happens to their score? What happens if they don't buy into the fact that because of the color of their skin, they have white supremacy and white privilege, and our whole country is a colonial, extremist, bigoted mess. What happens to those kids who don't exhibit the behaviors in the class? Because not only are they taking surveys, teachers are also recording through things like Class Dojo, right, their behavior. And they're being constantly tracked and assessed all day through like QR codes and all these things. they have to like scan in to certain programs with a QR code. I mean, they are being tracked from the moment they walk into school to the moment they leave those doors. And when all this information is going into a profile on them and they get ready to go to college or start a career, when you are already hearing from people like the Dayhill Group, if you go look at their website, they're already saying they're going to hire based on ESG principles. So is your child going to get a job if they don't rewire their mind to believe these progressive ideologies? Is your child going to be able to get into college? Or are they going to be ousted in society? And when we talk about where this is going, which is the even scarier part, because it's not just children being assessed anymore, right? We're also trying to bring in the adults. So next part of that is these community schools and the whole child design principles of the S.E.L.ing Alliance. S.E.L.ed stands for Science of Learning and Development. And this is junk science. Okay, I figured out, and I found out they are using basically like a sorting program to sort research, and then saying, we have come up with this whole synthesis of research that supports the idea that in order for a child that has trauma to learn, their environment needs to have belonging and inclusiveness. And remember, they get to decide what that is. So I put out a tweet recently that talked about how this is how they're going to get critical theories into all of society, and especially all of the community. Because when you talk about the whole agenda of the World Economic Forum is to have 15-minute walkable cities. And they expect that the school will be the community hub where all of the children and families get their services. So it's not, right now at school, we offer hearing and vision services at school, right? Well, they, as a part of this whole child design principles and integrated support services, they want to offer much more than that. So psychological services, right? You can see the mental health therapist while you're at school. They can refer you off of campus to go to Planned Parenthood. You can have spiritual services at school. But they call it spiritual but not religious, but just like we talked about, it's big G Gnosticism. And so they want to provide all these services so they can really cater to the whole child through the WISC model. Now, the whole school, whole child, whole community model, it was put forth by the CDC and ASCD. And again, this whole push for this is to not only be able to so if your child can get services at school, right? And then they're also, you can see that they are trying to frame it that parents who don't affirm their children, if they identify as a different sex, that they are framing that as abusive and traumatizing the kid. So we're going to see soon, it's already starting to happen in other countries even, that they're going to frame that in order for the child to thrive and have well-being, that they need to have this identity positive environment. And this is a part of the whole child design. So they're using it as not only a way to push, the affirming stuff with the transgender movement, but also to say you have to, in order to provide this environment, also acknowledge that every system that we're in is institutionally racist and privileged, and that people have to address that in this environment in order for kids to learn. And so, especially with, minority children, they're going to have to teach critical race theory to provide this environment. And so, because they say every place a child goes and every adult that child interacts with is a place of learning. And therefore, those adults need to be trained in how to provide that environment for children. So this is scary, right? Because we're seeing all this happen, and then so the adults will have social credit scores, because again, in order to figure out if people are adopting the right mindsets and behaviors to provide that environment, they're also going to have to be assessed. And the children are being assessed. Everybody in the community providing the services is being assessed. They're going to have, now they're pushing digital wallets, right? So these competencies that people learn, teachers call them micro competencies, right? When they are learning new stuff in teaching. Now they're moving our whole education system to a competency-based model. And it's not just competency-based, it's personalized competency-based. So it's specific to them and how they learn. So all the data is personalized. If that is put into a wallet, a credentials wallet, and then you have to show that to your employer, and then they connect all of these systems through what's called the Internet of Education, right? They literally want to create this open online access platform where competencies will be like currency, be able to be traded like goods or services, right? A lot of people call these smart contracts. You can look them up. And for instance, a kid could trade their competencies for work at a company that maybe they'll potentially work at in 5 years, right? If the employer sees their competencies are great.
So the employer then gets bonus points, as it were, for hiring the right kind of kid.
Correct. Their ESG score goes up. Yep. Exactly. So you are going to have to comply in this society, or you're going to be not able to participate.
And no one will be able to buy or sell without a number. That should ring a bell. The last book of the Bible is very interesting. A top-down, controlled, heavily controlled environment. Could we ever get to a point where a person or a small group controls everyone, and with the flip of a switch, you can't buy or sell? Now they've got you. Yeah. It's interesting how 2,000 years ago that was written. So,
yeah.
So as we come into our last 10 minutes of the program, I quickly have a couple of questions. We talked about accountability. That's something that I'm obviously most concerned with, is accountability. We could talk about accountability on multiple levels: teachers, superintendents, ministers of education. Let's start with something really straightforward and simple for the parents and even the grandparents to start grasping and getting a hold of. Is this where you, Lisa Logan, would suggest get your kids away from the schools as quick as possible?
I would say that, definitely, especially if they're in a dangerous situation, because I didn't even talk about this part, but the part of S.E.L. is also, I think, called restorative justice and positive behavioral integral supports. And so they're not, if kids are in a minoritized group, they don't have the same punishments as everyone else. And so this is why you're seeing a lot of violence happen at schools. So yes, I would say your kids, if they don't have a strong grounding in your familial beliefs, are in danger of being indoctrinated, for sure. Now, a lot of people will take that information and say, "Yay, we need to have school choice then. We need to have the money follow the child." No, because remember how I talked about how the data follows the child? Well, that doesn't stop when the money follows the child. And so anywhere that money goes, that data will follow them. That's not a solution to their problem, and in fact will exacerbate it and bring this agenda into homeschools and private schools that already haven't adopted it. So the other thing that needs to happen is lawsuits. They are, like you mentioned earlier in our first show, that they are traumatizing children by putting them through some of the exercises that social emotional learning programs and practices require. They are practicing psychology without a license in many cases. Also, we are violating the First Amendment, because through S.E.L. and the stuff they are teaching, because again, they're getting to teach a worldview that violates some children's rights of conscience. They are violating the First Amendment, and we need to bring suit. Parents need to start asking questions. And the other thing is, they are not being honest about where your children's data is going and who is it being shared with. And we need to demand transparency, because it's ridiculous that FERPA was basically gutted. And anybody who is a third-party vendor that is doing business with the school has access to your child's data. And even if they sign a contract that says, well, we're not going to share this data with anybody, there is nobody responsible for actually tracking that to make sure that's not happening. And when asked in a data privacy meeting, a board member told me that when she asked the question of who's overseeing all of this, they said it would take an army of people 1 million hours to oversee if and when that data is being shared and if that contract is being violated.
That's going into the AI realm now, and they're basically utilizing that, and the AI is taking over. AI is doing all the work of that 1 million people that would need to crunch those numbers. And we see the same thing happening on job applications when you sign in through Indeed and other big players. So They've really got us. They've got us in a really bad spot. And I agree that the accountability from a lawsuit angle, are we talking criminal now, or are we talking civil? What are your thoughts?
I'm not a lawyer. I think we should start talking to some lawyers who would know the best angle to come at this from. But when you think about lawsuits, religion is one of the most protected aspects of our country, right?
That's right.
And the freedom of religion. And so I think that would be a very good angle to go at with it. It's freedom of religion and violating the rights and duties of conscience of our students when they come into school and they're taught a different religion.
So let me ask you, have you thought about going after the teachers and the superintendents and the principals' bonds at all?
I haven't. I know there are other places that have. I've heard of that strategy. Unfortunately, because the system itself is what I'm almost taking the anti-racist stand. The education system itself is what's literally forcing many of these people to do a lot of the things that they're doing. And like I said, there are many good teachers who close their door and don't teach it the way that they want them to. But they're even under a social credit system. They're being graded on how well they implement these policies, and based on the answers that the students give on the survey, they're even asking, are your teachers addressing these things? So I don't know if going after the teachers or administrators is fair, to be honest. I think we got to attack it from a systems level.
After doing what I've done for so long, I think that my social credit score is dwindling as I speak every single minute of every single day. And by the time I'm done, if they think I'm a problem now, they haven't even seen me get out of my chair yet.
Yeah, think about the title of this program, Unmasking the Trans Movement. Our score is not very high, quite frankly.
No.
Okay.
No.
Because we're getting the heart of the matter of one of the prongs of the blitzkrieg kind of thing, that the strategy, multiple prongs. This is one of the prongs. Mm-hmm. Lisa, what would you suggest for lawmakers? So at the local level, or Canada has provinces, we have states. What can lawmakers do to begin to help try to turn this around?
Utah just passed a law dealing with rights of privacy and rights of conscience. And I think that they need to start passing laws like that protect our students and their families in schools. I think also, unfortunately, a lot of the lawmakers listen to people like the National Council, state legislators, and the American Legislative Exchange Council for policy. They even have an agenda. And I think they need to start looking to more outside organizations and even parents like me. I mean, there's a network of parents who are actually researching this on the ground. Because we've talked to, I've gone to DC and I've spoken with lawmakers there. Many of the people that are in charge of their education policy have no clue what's going on. And that scares me. They need to get educated. So I would say the policy for lawmakers, find the people on the ground who actually know what's going on. Don't just listen to these think tanks, because often they're either misinformed or they have their own agenda to make money, like through school choice.
And the way government is structured, that politicians come and go, but the bureaucrats, those that are hired by federal, provincial, state levels, those are the policies that are getting implemented. So it really does take somebody that's going to be an activist, that's going to have to step up. Parents are going to be the key, because our rights, our parental rights, are being undermined in a very methodical way, and a number of different methods. You certainly have shown us what social emotional learning is and how it taps into the trans movement. The trans movement, when you talk about the sex and sexuality of a kid and you start to introduce concepts, it changes the worldview. It changes the ability of a child to discern. And eventually, when enough pressure is brought to bear, right, the child realizes, oh, okay, I can get this pressure off of me if I just say, okay. If all I have to do is say the word non-binary, and then not only is the pressure taken off me, this group pressure, but now I'm actually affirmed. Now I'm being empathic little by little. the child says, oh, okay, well, forget that. I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to say, well, I don't believe in that, because now I get inundated. So it's not worth it. But then little by little, they're sort of drinking the Kool-Aid.
So this is where the guy down the street actually decides to wear a dress, and then he comes, walking over to my house and demands that I wear the dress next and that I participate. And if I don't, then something's wrong with me. Same thing happened with COVID. That was their little test from the World Economic Forum's point of view. Like I said, politics doesn't need to come into this program, but it really is embedded in all of us, and it will be embedded in every single issue going forward. It starts with our presidents, our prime ministers, kings, queens, not Klaus Schwab. Not close. Close isn't even close to being the top ranking person in this evil plan that's being put in effect here in, the West. But it's not even just the West. We're seeing it in Australia, New Zealand. We're seeing it in El Salvador. We're seeing it in Sri Lanka. We're seeing it in Holland. It's everywhere. And that's the problem. We need to take stance. That's why we do this show every day. Lisa, because of people like you, we gain so much knowledge and insight that others maybe can't explain the way that you've brought it to the table today. The way that you've done that has been very educational, and anybody watching now has a better perspective on really what this is about from a grander scale. It's not just a micro issue or topic like we usually deal with on this program. This is a world issue. This is where you brought that world together to be able to present the information that you presented, and we thank you. Thank you very much, and I hope that every single viewer got a lot out of this.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
John, give you last word, pal.
You summed it up, and Lisa, thank you so much. You are a wealth of knowledge. We'll have you back. And you had referenced that you are friends with Denise Roberts. Denise has been on our program, and we'll put together a webinar where the two of you methodically can help parents understand it in detail. What are these threats, and then what they can do about it.
And ask some questions along the way and get the help that they need from getting the right answers, not just whatever we're talking about, because they need to get into some of those details, those finer points that are going to help them get through the conversation with their child. Could be that they're going to the school board or the school. Everything matters these days. Words seem to hurt. Words seem to matter. Well, guess what? I still say we stick with the original English language dictionary. And if we do that, we just might win the day. This is Unmasking the Trans Movement. I'm Brad Wilder on behalf of John Euler and Lisa Logan. Thank you very much to everybody for being here today. Remember, it's not our kids' fight, it's our fight. So make sure you stand up, take stance now. And you can find all the information to help you with those resources on our website at unmaskingthetransmovement.com. We'll see you soon.